right? So that is the main reason why frameworks are introduced into market. Now the next thing is, are these the components of Java? I mean, are these like framework of direct Java? Like if you install your JDK, right? So will that be enabled with frameworks? First and very foremost thing is that it is no. Frameworks which we have in market, right, doesn't come directly with JDK. So many people just gets confused here that if you install JDK, even the frameworks like Springs, Hibernate, all everything will come. No, that is not correct, right? Now JDK is something which gives complete support to Java mainly, right? You can write any program, you can do anything on Java. Now these frameworks are something which are the products, right, developed on Java, and we are using these as APIs. These are nothing but APIs, like we call jars, right? Jars. Like what people have done is they have developed these frameworks as jars. We can use these APIs into our program to actually make our program better. Now, few things, like if you want to implement something called MVC, let's take an example of MVC, which is Model View Controller. Now, you guys would have seen so many, in current market, right? So many things are going on, are in MVC patterns, right? It can be web development, right? Or it can be any desktop-based application development, anything. Everything works in a Model View and Controller. I'll show you. Will understand what exactly is MVC, right? Why do we need to have patterns? What is factory, and everything we'll understand. No worries on that, right? So here, in order to actually build an MVC, right, without any framework, you can also build a MVC structured web application, right? But there may be possibility that you may miss something, that the complete MVC meaning will actually skip from the actual program you're doing. In order to make sure that everything you're actually coding on or developing something, right, completely follows some pattern, you need something to monitor your program, right? Or something that you just get used to it, and irrespective of anything, whatever you're coding, you are actually making sure that you're actually following some pattern. Let's say MVC pattern, right? So for that support, and for that, to create that layer of feel that yes, if you're developing something on this using these APIs or jars, right, then yes, you are actually following something like MVC, right? So these layers, which we call them as jars, right, created by third party guys, are called as frameworks. That's it. So those are the frameworks. Now even you can develop your own framework if you feel that, right? If you feel that something, right, which is in Java development or any development, right, something which is going redundant, always you want to, this is something which everyone uses, and you want to make it generic, you can also develop your own class files, make it a jar, and call it as some framework name. You can also do that. And this framework, right, we are going to learn three very important frameworks in market called Struts. The first framework which we are going to learn is Struts, which is a complete MVC patterned web work struts. And then we'll be learning Springs, which is injection model, object injection models, and then we'll be learning Hibernate. Right? So these are the three frameworks which we are going to learn in our frameworks section. Right? Now each and every framework, right, have got its own importance. Now all these frameworks are actually used in different directions or different angles. Now Struts is mainly used in like web works, right? So basically to actually create a MVC pattern of your website, we use Struts. Springs is something which is used for injection models, right? In order to create a generalized object model, right, we use Springs. Now, how does it actually use as a support, right? How can we use that Springs in order to get more, feel of, getting rid of dependency injections and all, right? We'll be learning in Springs, which is completely will give us a OOPS support of specifically in object model. That is Springs. When I go to Hibernate, Hibernate is something which will give you a new meaning of accessing database, right? JDBC, we have already learned JDBC, but JDBC is something which will give support on like direct way. Anyways, JDBC is the first and the one of the API which is used to connect to database and do some SQL, DB operations, right? Some DML operations. But Hibernate is something which gives us a smarter way to actually do some things with databases, right? You can do whatever you can do in JDBC, you can also do in Hibernate too. But Hibernate is something which is like a complete entity model based DB accessible framework. Now even Hibernate, Springs and Struts, right? They have their own jar files, their own APIs. Unless we include those jars into our project, right, or into our project which is actually we are building on JDK, right, we can't actually use frameworks. So that is something very important. Now you can see for Struts you have a separate site. I've just opened it, right? Struts is something which is Apache's product, and basically if you come to Struts, let's see the first model Struts actually, and then we'll go to the next one, right? Now basically Struts was actually introduced by Craig. Now his actual name is Craig McClanahan, actually Clanahan. Now this is his name. Craig was a person who actually created Struts, right? And it was actually created by this guy, and he donated this to Apache Foundation. So Apache company incorporation is the biggest company ever. Now we have already heard of this name in when we actually were working on Tomcat. Tomcat is something which is again an Apache product. Wicket, the new framework, right, which is in market, is called as a Wicket. I don't know whether you guys know that or not. Let me just show you that Wicket framework, right? So even Wicket framework is Apache's framework actually. You can see Wicket is something which is Apache's one, and it was initially released on, you can just go ahead and see here 1.3, everything you'll find all the documentations. See, for frameworks, documentations are very clear, right? You can see it's a complete documentation type which we have. Now as we find this documentation for Java, right, in our Oracle docs, same way for each and every framework, right, you have its their own documentation. You can see in documentation of Struts you'll find everything. You have Struts 1, you have Struts 2 and everything. The latest one is Struts 2 anyways, right? So it was year 2000 when actually framework called Struts frameworks was donated to Apache Foundation, right? And initially in 2001 in mid-June, right, it was 1.0 version of Struts was released, and when it actually released into market, right, so it used to support only the direct control model and not completely a web work. Now the latest one, which is Struts 2.0 version, which is normally 2.3.3, I would say, it is the latest stable build of Struts which we have, which was released on 2012. Now all the releases, right, all these releases are actually taken care by Apache Foundation, right? And normally Struts 2 is a powerful tool which is a completely POJO model, which is plain old Java object model, right, which will give you a validation support, Ajax support, integration support, right? All these things are actually given by the Strut things, right? And even these Struts gives us different things like tiles, right, which you can actually create on pages. Tiles are nothing but like divs. We create different sections on page, right? So it have got one of the concept called tiles, and you have it also have a direct support to actually integrate with Hibernate and Springs too, right? So that is a thing what we have, and we are going to check out 2.3 version, which is the latest version of Struts, and we'll see different things what exactly we do have here. And Struts is something which is completely built in order to make the web work mostly on MVC pattern, which is called as a model, view, and controller. Right? Now, if you see in .NET, right? In .NET we have something called MVC. .NET MVC. The latest one going on is 4 and 5 is in queue anyways, right? Now, this .NET MVC is something which is an integrated product of .NET, right? If you have your Visual Studio, right? Visual Studio ready. If you are installing the complete complete Visual Studio, which means you already have your MVC deployed in your machine. But it is not the case with one of the model. Now in our .NET we call it as MVC3 or MVC4 with the name itself. But in Java, if you see the equal or parallel name, one of the external component which we are using as a framework in our Java web application to actually make it MVC model, right? We are using struts. So that is a main comparison which if you want to make, right, you can actually make it this way, right? And normally whenever you say pattern or something, right, it is something which is like, like architecture you're actually creating for your own application in order to have a better maintenance, or in order to have a good development cycle, in order to have a better understandability mainly, right? Now let's say you have written a you developed some components of a application, right? And you just for some reasons some other guy have to take care of those components, right? So whatever you have developed, right, should be very transparent and should be more understandable, so that the person who is going to take care of things, right, should actually understand them much better, right? So and this patterns, right, will actually give you that sort of architecture, one of the pattern. Now here, so we are going to learn many patterns. So here what we are going to learn in this is the MVC pattern. So in our Springs we learn something called the, what is that, factory pattern, right? We have something called factory patterns, which is a very important and very famous model which most of the developers in every company uses, which is called as an object factory model, or something called component factory model, or controls factory model, or custom what is that, item factory model and all. Because Springs is something which is built as a equal or similar pattern to factory model, right? So we'll be learning these things there, right? So in this way they have their own patterns, which is, we call it as an architecture, some architecture to actually get a better way of programming, right? And every framework, right, provides the foundation in terms of libraries, or or some way in order to start up in order to start up and develop in a quick manner, right? Take an example of Eclipse. Eclipse is something which was built on Java, right? And we are using Eclipse in order to build Java applications, as simple as that, right? Now this is, Eclipse is not a part of JDK. Once you install your Eclipse, right, it doesn't mean that you will have, once you install your JDK, it doesn't mean that you also have your Eclipse. No, Eclipse is something which you have to download, right, which is actually built on Java, but we are using this Eclipse, and this Eclipse will give us a support to write a Java program. Same way we have frameworks. Frameworks is something which is built on Java, but we can use the APIs in order to write some pattern programs. So the first pattern which we are going to learn is MVC pattern here. So Struts is something which actually gives us something called a model of MVC. And if you're using Struts, you don't have to worry about whether you're actually using it or not, because the MVC pattern is something which is very clearly implemented on Struts. And as we progress into the classes, right, you'll understand how exactly it works. Anyways, we are going to start up with something called some examples on Struts, and we are going to actually learn 2.3.3. And if you see the site, right, even you'll have the same Struts. Anyways, don't worry about the build here. The builds will be going on. The main release in Struts is 2.3, and the subversions of builds here actually, right? Don't worry about that. You can also use the same. And in your Apache site, right, you can use the same Apache site here. You can just go and say Struts download. It will actually take you to the Apache Software Foundation, and you can see that you can actually download your binaries. And you can actually download the examples, documentation, source of these examples, everything. You can download them. And some in the same page, right, you also have something called 1.3. Now this was the latest version on 1.3, and for your information, both 1.3 and 2.3 releases are parallelly going, right? Because the people who actually develop their applications in 1.0 version, or the version which is compatible with this, right, they also need some support. So that's why they're actually going this. So maybe in future, right, once everything gets, they'll be getting feedback, right? Like all the products, when they migrate into 2.x version, right, then obviously they'll stop the older version support. But yes, we do have support for 1.3 also. But everything, if you're learning this, right, which means it also covers this and much more. Now this is something which is much powerful than the previous version, because Struts 2.x will actually give support to two things, very important things, which is web work plus everything on Struts 1. Now this is called as a Struts 2. The complete web work on MVC patterns and the Struts 1, including Struts 1, which is the model of maintaining MVC, right, actually gives us something called Struts 2. Now in a very simple equation, I can actually map in this way, right? That's why we are going to learn everything, right? So this is something which is about Struts, how it actually evolved into market and all. And Apache Foundation is something which is taking care of all the releases, binary, providing binaries for different support and everything here. And Struts is a complete open source software framework which we have in market, right? There is no licensing for this. It's a complete free licensing. But yes, if you want a support from Apache, then you'll have to get a support which is a premium support from Apache, right? They are actually getting things done with maintenance. Tomcat, see, take an example of Tomcat, right? Tomcat is something which is a complete open source, but how they are actually surviving is through maintenance works. Like every time you are using Tomcat, right, few organizations, they have to get a direct support from the actual developers of, the actual company who actually develops the server called Tomcat, right? So that is something, for that they'll have to get an pro model of support. That is the main area where they're actually getting that, right? Now yes, so this is about how it evolved and what is the actual pattern we are going to learn. Now Struts follows MVC pattern and what is all about Struts, right? Now let us see what exactly is MVC, right? So which is very important pattern, MVC pattern here. And if you already have some knowledge on MVC in other technologies, right, as FTCar have on .NET, right, where there we have something called MVC, and it will give us a direct support on, it will actually force us to use controller, it will actually force us to use view, right, it will actually force us to create some model classes to give support to the views or some controllers, right? So that is how the supportive frameworks will actually make us work on MVCs. So first, let us understand what exactly is a MVC model which we have, right? Now, so here to start up with, so we have three different components as I said, which is model, view, controller. Now first let us actually understand with a use case, right, which is a famous use case actually, to actually make this MVC pattern more clear. Now let me just take an example of the restaurant itself, right? So let us say there is a restaurant, right, and there is one guy, right, who is taking care of everything, like preparing food, right, serving it, right, and getting the orders, everything, right. So let us say there is a table and they have got it, he have got some customers, right. Now this is a guy initially who is taking care of everything. He prepares food, takes the order, right, arranges the food, right, and then gives back to the user. That is what it happens. Now as number of customers are increasing, right, so what this guy thought of is he thought of hiring one chef, right. So he thought of hiring one chef, and what he did, this guy used to actually work as a getting the order and passing the order to chef, and chef will actually prepare food and give back to the same guy here. Now this guy used to again arrange the food and give back to the customers, where they have got more customers in this restaurant. Now, so let's say his business was going fine and everything is fine. Now what happens? The customer base got increased. Now for that reason, what he did, he hired one more guy who is a very good, you know, very good in arranging food, right? Now you can see here the complete customer base are increased. Now this guy who is the owner of company is actually doing these tasks. He is taking the request, right, and actually giving the request to the chef, and chef is giving food, and this guy immediately gives food to this guy. This guy is actually arranging the food in plates, give back, and owner goes and serve the chef. Now you can see two things he is actually saving the time: preparing food and arranging. These two tasks are something which are very important, right? Food should be good, and arrangement of food. I mean, who wants, which table wants which food is important, right? Now you can see here that getting the request and serving back the request is taken care by one person called owner. Now this owner is called as a controller. He controls the actual flow. Now whenever he gets a request, right, now you can see that, so that request has to be processed, right, which means that request needs some business to work. Now here what is the request? To get the food. Now in order to get the food, what is the main task? To prepare the food, right? Now that task he is actually redirecting to his chef. Now this chef is called as a model who actually prepares the food, right? And then once the food is ready, right, it will be scrambled, so many items will be there. Now before serving to each and every customer, controller needs to get things ready. Now that's the reason why once he gets food, he'll supply back to the next person who actually arranges the food, and what he'll do, based on the request given by owner, he'll arrange the food in different plates and serve back to the owner, and he is called as a view, because he is actually arranging everything so that the whole food looks in a very good manner. Now this view gets back to the controller, and this controller will actually feed the customer, right? That's how you have your model, view, and controller. And you can see that every request and response, without controller, no request or no response will be passed to anyone. So both the flows have to be passed through something called controller. If I remove this controller, whole system will get down, right? So that is important. Now, if I remove model, maybe I can actually get some more model, one more model. But this guy knows whom to give and whom to pass on, right? And the same way, if you remove this, if this guy leaves, he can actually hire one more guy who can actually arrange the food, which means generating view, right? So this is how the actual restaurant model works, right? Basically, what we'll do, instead of owners, we can actually say that this is a manager, right? Because as customer base became more and all, right? But this model will work completely in the same way. If there is any disturbance in this, like manager is serving, manager is actually preparing food, then what happens? Then there will be a disturbance. And one more thing, if manager is arranging food in systematically, then again it will hit. Every component will do its own work in order to work system in a smooth manner. Now this is the best example that you can actually match up with your controller. Now let me show you the same model, right, in as per our servlet model, right? Now let's say you have your controller, which is, we can say controller, right? Which means every time we get request, what is the first component which get triggered in our application? Which is servlet. Because servlet is a server side scripting, right? Servlet is the one which actually accepts the requests. And from servlet, we can actually pass on the servlet request to something called model. Now what is model here? Models are nothing but a plain .java classes, or we also call it as a business classes, right? And what is view? A view is nothing but your JSPs. All the JSPs, right? Particularly in our case of Java, all JSPs are called the views. Now, based on the request which servlet is getting from client, I'm not talking about struts anywhere here. I'm talking about the normal mapping of MVC on the existing servlets and JSPs model, right? How to create? Now you have to create this controller, and you can see that, yeah, this guy is actually he is calling some classes, preparing some output out of these business classes. Once he gets output, now he's approaching the view, and this view will actually arrange all the details like tables or controls, and then it will be fed back to the client. Now this is something where you can actually see the MVC model. Now here, let's say client is calling JSP directly. What happens? Now what is the difference between calling JSP and servlet? The main difference is, if you call servlet, you won't have extension .jsp, right? Which means you can call servlet with the direct name. Let's say it is servlet 1. If you call servlet name directly, which means, let's say servlet 1 is something which is controller, which means you are calling controller. In the same way, let's say you have login.jsp, right? Client can also call login.jsp directly, which means he is directly accessing view here, which means we are actually skipping the controller part. Now this is what happens once you enter and create MVC model out of the existing components of Java, right? That is what happens. Now, so in order to map these into some certain models, right, which is, let's take an example of, if you want to make sure controller always works as a controller, view should always work as a view, and model should always work as a model, then what should be the actual mapping, right? Now the mapping should be on broad. This should be the controller. Now whenever there is a request coming up to this layer, it should go through the controller, otherwise there should not be any bypassing out of this, as simple as that. And this controller will actually give model, and this will also interact with views. Now let's see how we can actually do this. Now the first part is, in this controller, you can have two components. First component is something which can handle inputs, the requests, and this input layer will talk to something called another layer called some XML, which is routing XML, like configs. Let's say this is a configuration. Now based on this input, this XML knows whether to pass it on to model, or if it is passing to model, get the response and pass it on to view, or directly give it to view. And view is something which will create a JS piece and give back to the controller, which will be served. Same way, when we gets any response from model, right, this will serve to JSP. It will try to get a JSP, complete JSP page and give back the buffer to the client. Now this is what is going to happen. Right now, let's map the same thing. How do we have in struts? Now this here you can see you have a very strong layer which will never allow anyone to directly access anything. They have to follow MVC model. Now let us see what are the actual components which we have in struts in order to achieve this. Now the first layer which you have in controller is called as interceptors. Now interceptors in struts is a main component which actually takes out the request. If you don't plug in interceptor, or if you do something to interceptor, the whole application will not work. Very important one. The second layer, and this is something which is already predefined by struts. You have all the interceptors written in struts. You don't have to write anything. But yes, you also have support that you can also write a customized interceptor. When we actually progress through the course, we'll understand how to write a custom interceptor. But this is the layer which actually gets the input from the request. Now the next layer, which is a very important layer, which is a routing config, which is in form of XML, is called as a struts XML. This is nothing but your strut XML. And this strut XML is the one which we are going to see, which will be a controller part in our struts. And the model here also called as action classes, which is a plain Java class. Normally one action class will be mapped to something called different business services. Now business service is also a simple .java class. We'll see how exactly we can create all these things when we actually move on with the simple application. Now this is something which will act as a action class mapping to different business services. Right? Now the next one is, once you are done with model, then you will be getting back to the view part. So in this view part, we have JSPs, all JSPs. You can have any number of JSPs which you will be mapping. Now this JSPs, which is a view, I can replace this with this JSP, will have different something called tag libs. If you remember in our something called directives, right, which we have learned in JSPs, I said there is a directive called tag lib directive. We have page directive, we have include directive. The third one was tag lib, right, which is a tagging library directive, right. Now here we are going to see how powerful is tag lib directive, right. We are going to actually get the complete support of strut creation of tags, which is strut tags, right, using tag libs. If you don't use tag libs, you can't get a support of direct HTML model components which will be accessed through JSPs. Now this is something which will act as a view, all the JSPs. In each and every JSP you will have your tag libs, and multiple JSPs will have multiple tag libs. Now this is a complete model of model, you can see model, view and controller using struts. And this is what we are going to see, like how to set up things, like how to do different things. So these are whatever you can see, are the things which you are going to learn. The interceptors, the XML, different things of XML, different things of mappings, right? Different configurations of JSP views and basic configuration of struts. In order to use struts, what to do, right? All these things we are going to learn in our frameworks, right? So this is a model, framework model, which is pattern, which we are going to learn, which is a MVC pattern, and we'll see how we can actually implement these. First, we'll start with the configuration, right? Downloading binaries. I'll try to keep the binaries ready, right? And mainly how to set up the struts as we are developing things in Eclipse, right? Mainly we have to know how to set up struts in Eclipse, right? So I'll be doing it as a brand new because I've taken a new workspace. You can see I haven't configured any struts, I haven't configured anything. So I'll keep the binaries ready and I'll keep the things ready so that you can actually have a better look on how to configure and do everything. Fine. So yeah, this is all about MVC pattern which we have, and this is what we are going to learn each and every components of struts. So till here, do you guys have any questions, Banu, Iftikhar? Right? So we'll understand what are the different files we have to create in our strut application on Eclipse, which should be standard, right? Some few names of some XMLs, right? Or few names of some strut XML. I mean, inside strut XML, what is the different tags which you have to actually use in order to create that, right? What is a filter? Now one of the very important thing which we are going to see here is how can we map a web.xml with strut.xml. If you remember, we had one XML called web.xml, right, which is also called as deployment descriptor. Now we have already used that for some servlet config or JSP config context and all, right? Now here web.xml is going to play a very important task, so to start or to trigger this interceptor, right? Now how can we actually integrate this with Tomcat, right? Everything is something which are a very important task, and we'll see these things, right, in our next class. So we'll start up with setting up from where to here. This is a site which is Apache site, which is for struts. Go to download site and you can actually get the full release binary from here. You can actually get the full distribution from here. Now this will actually give you the complete. Now you don't have to worry. This will actually, I'll explain each and every folder of once you download this, right? You'll actually get all the libraries, I mean different jars and all. But in order to develop, I mean this will actually include even the 1.0 version also. But you don't have to actually use all the jars for your strut development. So what are the different jars which you can use? I'll explain you, and you can actually use them directly in your project, and then you can actually go ahead with your struts development.